Hey guys, welcome to Sketch-A-Day. I'm Spencer. If this is your first time, be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on alerts, and definitely come say hi to me on the socials. I am at Sketch-A-Day on Instagram. Pretty easy to find. And there I post other things. You can also visit sketchaday.com/newsletter and sign up for my newsletter because you don't want to miss out on what's to come. I'll just leave it at that. So today we're going to sketch one of these, and yes, these are mine. Kind of gross, I know, but I did clean them up. And I'll go through the process of how I draw something like this and think through the process. So as always, materials are below in the description. You can check that out there. And be sure to use those links because it's a great way to support the channel and what we do here at Sketch-A-Day. When I'm thinking of something like these clippers, what I like to do is imagine that I have a laser knife and I'm cutting through the shape of this thing. Now I can identify positions at which the shape is transitioning. So if you look at it from a side view, you can kind of see there's a shape at the end here. Looks kind of like a rectangle if I flip it in this direction. And that kind of fans out as I rotate this pair of clippers here, or set of clippers. It flares out a bit to this widest point, okay, right around where this lever is. And the cross section looks somewhat like the rectangle as well. And flipping it to the side, I can see that there's another inflection point right through here. So I can imagine 1, 2, 3, and then 4 planes at an angle, this last one, to essentially describe the form. So with that, I'm going to use a 30% gray marker here, and I'm just going to sketch one view. And if we want, we could imagine the view having a hand in it. Maybe this could be another view that we can sketch up real quick here. And I'm just going to use my hand for reference, just because it's a lot easier to kind of do that as you're drawing. Nothing wrong with quote unquote cheating in that way. So I can use my hand as a reference just to show what this might look like. Okay, and we'll figure out the design details as we go. But again, pretty easy way to throw a hand in your sketch is just by drawing your own. Okay, so there I have a quick sketch of my hand holding this pair of clippers. Now for the big sketch, I'm going to start by just drawing a couple lines here, and I want this to be fairly big. So let's draw this like we would any kind of tapering form. So these planes being parallel to each other. Okay, so this is just the wireframe for the clippers. Now remember when we looked at these, there's an angle. Okay, so if this is my parallel planes going through the form all the way down, I now have an angle at the end. So to do that, I'm just going to mark a point right there, and now I have a little bit of an angle to work with. I also know that the front of the clippers extend out a little bit. Okay, and we'll get to the detail on that as well. Now the body, like we had decided, has a few inflection points. Okay, so we had a little bit of a bulge at the top here and a return, perhaps for ergonomic purposes. Actually, this whole surface is curved and my undulation happens on the back here. So I can figure that out just by mapping out some planes. So now I'm going to fix the perspective on the end here. But now I have these planes that describe the form. And we have some functional bits here, like if you look at this particular pair of clippers, we have screws, we have carriages. On the blades themselves, there's some screws, there's a texture grip, and a little bit of a hook so that you can hook this onto something as you're clipping hair. So for the switch, I'm going to go with something on the side, and I think there's some wisdom there in the sense that going with the switch on the side means that as I'm holding this, I'm not really getting in the way of the switch while I'm cutting hair. Also, like I said, we have this little lever. So for my clippers, I can modify the design as much as I want or see fit. And so let's go ahead and sketch in some sort of lever here, nice big screw. And I like when designs kind of flow and work together. So visually, I'm going to try and make sure this flows, maybe change the position of the switch a little bit. And I do want a material change at the end here, along with just rounding out and transitioning a few things. So we have, for example, where the cord enters the clippers, and I've got to figure out a way to transition that nicely. So just sketching that out in gray real quick, just to kind of give myself a placeholder. On the front, we have a little bit of a scoop back, and on my clippers, it's kind of a triangular bit. I'm not sure that there's any functional reason for that, but I'm just going to modify the shape ever so slightly and just throw in a couple lines here for the two clipper elements that come together. Okay, so we've got our comb and the blade itself. So I'm just going to block that in. We'll clean it up with some pen as we go. But again, we have our supporting sketch up here. I'm going to modify it just so it fits a little bit better. So we have our supporting sketch and our main sketch to finish out. Now, to finish that out, I'm just going to grab one of these paper made flares, and as always, just check to make sure it's nice and juicy. And now I can come in and sketch my final thing. So what I'm doing here is just ghosting in the line before I actually sketch it, and this way I can just swing an arc and I now have the right line that I'm after. Okay, for these lines on the inside, I may just have a little bit of an indication of what's happening, but really just trying to keep things a little bit cleaner so that when we put our marker down, things just work out really nicely for us. Okay, so I had this kind of transitioning element for the strain relief on the cable. I want to make sure I carry that through this little boot, if you will. And just working lightly with these lines. The one thing I did forget is I forgot to include this little loop. So I'm going to try and see if I can make that work on this sketch. We've got our element here on the front. Let's round this corner, and we'll come back and revisit this loop in just a sec. Let's get our adjustment wheel in place, along with our screw and the lever. So once I have the gray marker in, things can kind of change as well. So as I'm sketching this ellipse, I'm trying to be aware of its relative position in the system of perspective. So my correction here was just to adjust the degree of the ellipse so that it felt more accurate rather. Okay, so I'm just sketching in the comb and blade here. Okay, so clippers, they'll have two elements to them. And the top element and the bottom element kind of slide back and forth in an oscillating fashion. And that's what's going to give you your actual cut on your hair. So rather than figuring out every space here, I'm trying to just be reasonable, put some elements in, and create the impression that this is a clipper comb, like I said. And so to do that, just a couple lines parallel to each other, and now on the bottom, a little bit of a jog and offset to show that these things actually slide past each other. But here, I can now sketch my lines in. I'm trying to increase the line weight ever so slightly on one of these lines, and that's because one of them is the edge that's closest to me and the other is the edge that's further from me. So just a subtle thing, but gonna help you communicate depth even just with your line weights here. So small detail, hopefully a big impact on the overall sketch. Okay, just adding a bit of clarity to this, the rest of this here. Like I said, we have our lips. Let's throw in just 2 screws. And again, I'm picturing lines in perspective going back, okay, based on the angle of the surface and all that good stuff. So 2 screws, maybe some sort of logo, but we'll do that after. And I always like to kind of just throw a center line on, particularly if this is a sketch that isn't meant to be a final sketch. It just kind of helps things feel not so done and baked as we're thinking through concepts and trying to make sense of things. So just sketching in strain relief here with some alternating slot cuts. Again, just hinting at it, and then we can kind of trail off and fade off at the end right there. Okay, so there's the overall body of our clippers. I forgot to include my little switch here, so I'm gonna go ahead and sketch that in on the side, maybe with a little bit of texture and an indication of on or off. And I did like having this part break. I'm going to move the line ever so slightly, but now we have a part break on the side like so. And beefing up the line weight is just going to help this stand out overall. If we have, again, this supporting sketch, we can just keep it nice and light, loose, and definitely less defined than the main sketch, because whereas the main sketch I'm using to show surface and perhaps texture, color, all of that, this sketch is more meant to just show perhaps how it's hold and give a sense of proportion. Okay. So in that sense, the hand here is not meant to be the main part of the sketch, but rather support the information on the page, in a sense that we have here an example of a hand holding the product, so you get a sense of scale. Okay, so that's the purpose of a sketch like that, is to show some scale in this case. Just gonna add a quick shadow, and we'll just apply some gray marker to this guy, and that should finish things out on this top sketch. So things like where the finger overlaps here, maybe a little bit for the form. I should have said it, or should have added rather, at the beginning of the video that like much of the country, I am at home with my children, so any sounds you hear this week, you know, it's likely to be them this week, next week. I don't know how long we'll be under this, but that is that sound. Okay, so I have my main sketch, secondary sketch, and now I want to add some color. I like the brown on this, and I want to do some sort of brown finish, maybe a bit of chrome and rubber as well. So I have with me my earth tone markers, and with those right here, just pick a few colors. I've got a wide assortment here, so I'm just going to grab a handful and take a look. Maybe start with this 25, 37, 29, 74, and 35 and 49. Okay, so what I want to do is just create a little bit of a nice warm base for this. So I'm going to do 35 and 37 to start, and you always want to work light until you get it right. So let's say there's a highlight across the clippers here. What I'm doing is just trying to avoid this area, and then right next to the highlight I want there to be some contrast. Okay, and when I apply marker, this is just something helpful for me. I like to outline the area that I'm coloring. I'm not sure why, but it seems that I stop a little bit better when I do have that outline. It's almost like my brain sees it, and immediately I just have that enhanced control over the marker, so to speak. All right, so as we do this, I'm trying to build up contrast, but also imagine, what might be in the scene if it's reflecting onto these clippers. Okay, and we'll build our value as we go. Blend things. I am using Copic sketch markers and marker paper here, in case you're wondering. But as always, materials are listed in the video description, and you can check that out. So this corner, I am placing a shadow core. Again here, just trying to build up the value in this area next to my highlight here. And just make sure we preserve or keep a little bit of this nice white highlight. And as I go, just building up values. So now I'm using the 37. Okay. And I can introduce a couple lines here, as things are being reflected into these clippers to create the sense that this is something that is shiny. But not only is it shiny, but it has form. So being able to pay attention to how you shade it is going to be important, where you shade and why, and so forth. Okay, I haven't actually tested these colors all together, so I'm hoping the blends turn out all right. And so far, so good. And that's, again, one of the reasons I do enjoy Copic markers is they do tend to have fairly good blending properties and play nicely together. All right, so we'll just keep working this here until what I'm trying to do is build up to a nice contrast on this edge, but also maintain some of the streakiness. So now I can jump to a darker color and start to apply that in certain areas. Okay, because I want those nice deep browns that are going to be a part of the reflectivity and artifacting that is happening here. Okay, so even here where we have this little lever, it might be reflecting back into the clipper itself, and so you're going to get a little bit of a reflection there. If you are feeling adventurous, you can do something like grab your Copic air can and just hit your highlight with just a little bit of that brown. Okay, just a little hit there to kind of help things not feel so cool gray 3, which is what I was using for the underlay. Okay, so continuing to work with this, just scrubbing, blending, all that good stuff. We now have a pretty decent base here to work with. And I'm gonna go a little darker on the bottom side here, and I'll recover that highlight, or not highlight, but that reflection I had in place. No problem. Once I start applying a little bit darker tones here. So I've got this E49, for example, really deep brown. And so in here, I'm just gonna kind of hit that. So I have that reflection in place. Couple spots, enhance those artifacts, and keep working on the blends as well. So once again, using a Copic sketch marker here. Really doesn't matter too much what you're using, but the important thing is just to make sure that you can blend your colors if you're going to be doing something like this with a lot of reflections. Okay, so just keep working that. All right, so I'm gonna leave it here for now. Maybe just another couple hits in this really dark shadow core, and I may have to jump to like a black marker to finish that out. And then this end, let's say I want it to be some sort of plastic. I'm just gonna use my gray marker here and continue to build up as I go. Now this marker is a little bit dead, so I'm gonna see if I can grab like a cool gray 4 or something like that, and just finish this out. All right. So I got a 4 here, got another 3. Let's see if we're lucky. And this one is hopefully full of juicy ink. And score, we're good. All right, so here, again, just building up value, blending, trying to carry through the highlights where we can, and the shadows so that we have a consistent feel, okay, in terms of the form. So something like that, and then I'm gonna jump to this 60 or C6, hit these corners. Okay, we're just carrying the same feel through our marker here, and going back to 30%, you can just blend all this nice juicy ink, blend it together like so. I call this scrubbing when I just rub the marker on the paper. Just kind of scrub the paper a little bit, and the alcohol should blend your inks rather nicely together. Okay. Now for the rest of this, I'm going to use a darker gray. You know, if this were some sort of rubber or something like that, and just kind of fill it in. Definitely still emphasize the shadow core and then fill in the rest. So the rest of this, one marker stroke, and on the side that's not receiving light, a couple extra strokes, and now we have the contrast we need there for the form to read. Okay, just on this edge, like so, keep hitting. I find it helpful to squint if you're doing this. So if you, I'm gonna make this shiny, just FYI, but if you are working with something that needs contrast, squinting will get you, I'm actually mapping the reflection of the clipper here into this shiny surface. But squinting will reduce the detail that you see and allow you to kind of focus on the value of what you're doing. Okay, so that's what squinting will kind of do, and what it does for me rather. Okay, so here I'm just mapping out the reflection of the blades as best I can. We'll make it work into this surface. Okay, and now I'm gonna wash this surface with my 30% gray here, like so. Because like I said, I'm getting that reflection happening, and with a white pencil or some white paint or paint marker, I can add the highlights that I need to really make this pop. So here on these blades, just in the in-betweens, I'm gonna hit these with some really dark, this is a C10 marker. And immediately the contrast is helping these just pop. And so after applying this dark gray marker here, I'm now going to take this cool gray 3 and just kind of work this surface that's angled slightly down, the edges and the side of the blade as well. Just a little gray marker here. Okay, so hopefully you can kind of see what's happening now. We have the reflection of the blades into this shiny surface on the top, or the upper portion rather, and blending our way across. So if this isn't perfect shiny chrome, it will read as something like maybe a dark metallic shiny surface, okay, as we just scrub this across reflections are really what is going to help your surfaces read as shiny if that's what you're after. So that's something you want to practice and think about. And as far as how I do those reflections, it's really just imagining this surface as a mirror and then projecting those things into the surface itself. Okay, so like I mentioned, I have a white pen here, but I'm gonna allow this to dry just a little bit. Jump back to my upper portion, and while that's drying, just fill in some of the stuff here. Like we have this switch, okay, for on-off purposes. And I'm gonna make a couple bits of this dark so that it reads like a grip, just like so. Maybe even fill that in. All right. And I do want to enhance a little bit of what's happening on this top. So just using the brush tip of my marker, I'm gonna push some of these shadow cores and what's happening on the top here now that the ink has dried somewhat. So a little bit of artifacting, blending, all that good stuff. Like I said, I did forget to put in our little hanger. So right here on the back, it's just sketching in gray above everything else, and finish this off with my Papermate Flare pen here, like so. And wherever we need to add a highlight, I can use a nice white pen or some paint or pencil just to help this pop a little bit more, a little shadow under that guy. All right, so just like that. On this surface, I'm gonna just add a few stipples for texture. So just a couple dots here on that surface. You can see the airbrush effect and the highlight and how that's working on these clippers. Here we've got our reflection. And now what I was waiting for, that ink to just dry so I could come in and just clarify a bit using some sketch lines, what's happening. Because again, it's gonna be reflected back in this surface. If you really want that reflection to pop, a little bit of white is gonna go a long way on this reflection. So nice and dark shadow cast as these two parts meet. I guess I should have warned you guys this is going to be a little bit longer video, but hopefully you guys are getting some good stuff here, and I appreciate you watching as always on Sketchaday. All right. So, time to grab a pencil, and I've got a white pencil and black pencil here, pardon the noise. And with the black pencil, I'm just gonna pump or boost some of the shadowing that's happening on these clippers. So just in these really dark areas, and kind of shade and fan out. And so the pencil I'm using just really flat in these areas. Occasionally tipping it up, again to boost some of these highlights, or if I need to create a nice gradient on the side, I can shade over the marker. Now the pencil you want to make sure is the last step. You don't want to have to apply marker on top after you are using your pencil. So definitely be sure to think through your process just a little bit as you're doing it, because once you put this pencil on, the marker really won't work as well on your paper. Okay, the pencil kind of coats the paper a little bit. So just something to be mindful of. Okay, so like I said, here on the tops in the reflection, I'm just gonna lighten up a little bit so it starts to pop a bit more, like so. And on our receding bits as well, going back And now with the paint marker, you know, if we have some highlight pops here, we can carry those through into the reflection. Just on those corners of the clippers where we might be having, you know, a little bit of light hitting those spots. You can apply this paint marker on the screws, edges, and so forth as necessary to get that pop that we're after. Or if you filled in an area, you can use that paint marker to just fill in a little bit, enhance highlights, and so forth. So even some of these highlights that I had with my marker, I can apply the paint marker on top of that, and that's going to just help things pop. Or in the case of texturing, you know, you might use some white dots as well, just to balance things out. Here on this tube, and finally on our strain relief portion of the cable, just like so. So thinking through the lighting of your sketch is super important, and making sure that that's consistent and carried through, because that's going to help your sketches be that much more believable, readable, and understandable. Now the shadow on the bottom, let's keep it somewhat light to start. So this is a 40% gray, and just try to map this out so it feels like there's a cast shadow on the page. And now that I have this base gray in, you can even make the edge a little jagged here. But now that I have this base gray in at 40, I can take something like this 80 and start to apply it and fade out toward the ends. Now the shadow is not a perfect calculated projected shadow, but rather meant to relate to the form above and help it be more grounded on the page. So just something to be aware of and think about, and try perhaps if you are applying shadows on your sketches with marker, digitally or otherwise. Try not to get too hamstrung and caught up in the precision of your shadow, but rather focus on the overall effect of your shadow and what you're after. Okay, just a little bit of rim light here and edge highlights with my paint marker. If you pick up one of these, this is a Pitt Pastel Artist Brush pen that you can use, and it is opaque white. It's not quite the same as using, say, gouache, but it is pretty good. Now, the clippers themselves are going to have a reflection of the top going in. So shading in here is really just me recognizing and acknowledging that this horizontal surface here is going to have some sort of reflection. So just with my pencil, we can shade that in on the top of the blades right there. Okay, now the side, I'm gonna shade just a little bit like so. And then there's also gonna be a little bit of brown now being reflected into these clippers, and I wanna capture that. So just a little bit of brown right through there, and that's gonna show that the top is being reflected into this bottom. Okay, just like that. All right, well, we are pretty much done with this. Just a couple little things here. You know, if you're explaining a concept, you might have some sort of notes that you could apply. This is junk text, but in reality, we may do something like this and say, this is our adjustment lever. If you want to, be sure to check out my video on handwriting and lettering as a designer. So it's going to talk about how to do things like this, where you're able to develop your own style of handwriting essentially as a designer and apply that in your sketches. So grabbing a black marker, if I can find it, okay, there we go. Grabbing a black marker, I'm gonna apply just a little extra line weight on the backside of the clippers. This line weight is going to help communicate the depth and relative position of the product to the viewer. Okay, so just a little extra line weight on the outside. Clean that up, and there we have our finished sketch of a pair of clippers or set of clippers. I'm not sure if it's a pair or set, but certainly there's an authority who knows what it is. Well, thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you had a great time. I did. I always enjoy drawing with you. Be sure to join me on Fridays at 9 a.m. Pacific. I should mention that. That's when I go live and chat. Take your suggestions and we have a great time. Usually goes for an hour or two, so you'll want to check that out. Also, be sure to sign up for my newsletter at sketchaday.com/newsletter. And on this video, on this channel, be sure to hit subscribe. Turn on alerts. Thank you so much to all of you who've helped me build a subscriber base by sharing videos and getting the word out. I really appreciate it, much appreciated. That's probably the best thing you can do to help support Sketchaday. Besides buying stuff, you can always buy my brushes, which will be coming out soon. Well, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time right here on Sketchaday.